talk to you today about the 1920s, one of America's most famous decades. The 1920s were ushered in by the Kellogg-Briand Pact, which was a post-World War I pact that condemned war for all time. Unfortunately, it didn't have any legislative power, so it didn't work. The 1920s is best known as an era of extreme lavishness and huge parties, which it was. Prohibition gave rise to very many speakeasies and a rise in organized crime because of the banning of liquor with the Volstead Act. A growing rise in nativism in America gave way to the Emergency Quota Act of 1921 and the National Origins Act of 1924. These acts both put caps on immigration, especially aimed at immigration from Southern and Eastern Europe. The reason that Americans didn't want immigrants from Southern and Eastern Europe is because the immigrants from there were generally Catholic and darker skinned and didn't assimilate into American society as well as other immigrants. The 29th President of the United States was Warren G. Harding. He won the presidency on a campaign of a return to normalcy. His administration was riddled with scandals because of the crooked friends he had appointed to political office.
By Secretary of State Albert Fall leased Navy oil reserves to private companies. This scandal was called the Teapot Dome Scandal. Shortly after, I died in mysterious circumstances.
After the death of Warren G. Harding, he was succeeded by his Vice President, Calvin Coolidge. Calvin Coolidge was extremely pro-business and didn't have very much to say.
The business of the American people is business.
Do you have any thoughts on foreign policy, Mr. Coolidge?
No.
Do you have any thoughts on the economy?
No.
Any final thoughts?
Don't quote me.
The Scopes Monkey trial was arguably one of the most famous trials in American history. This trial was the culmination of the fundamentalist traditional American values against the new forward-thinking sciences. Clarence Darrow defended a Tennessee high school teacher teaching evolution, which was at the time illegal. William Jennings Bryan led the prosecution, arguing for creationism.
Jonah was swallowed by a whale!
But was he really?
Okay.
Rise in new media was demonstrated by the massive coverage of the Scopes Monkey trial. The new media also made radios a commonplace item in American homes and made movies much more popular as well. Sports were made more popular by a lot of coverage in the media as well and gave rise to new celebrities such as Babe Ruth. Part of the rise in the new media was African Americans running their own newspapers. This was also part of the Harlem Renaissance, a cultural revival of African American communities. It focused on musical, artistic, literature, and intellectual contributions to the African American environment. This created Harlem, a community in New York that was chiefly African American and was a hotspot of new cultural awakenings. One of the most memorable things about the 1920s is the huge economic prosperity of the era. Anyone who wanted to get rich could. One of the things that really highly contributed to this was the rise in the automobile industry. The automobile industry was booming during the 20s, and almost every American family owned a car. This made suburbs much more popular because it was easier to travel farther. People who were doing well could afford to live nicely outside the bustle of the inner city. One of the other things that contributed to the prosperity of the 1920s was the advent of buying on the margin. That was where a person could buy stocks paying only 10% of what the stock cost, and the rest they said they would pay later. This was one of the things that made people rich quickly, but ultimately contributed to the collapse of the stock market. And the collapse of the stock market happened on October 29, 1929. This day has become infamously known as Black Tuesday. The bottom fell out of the stock market, and millions lost their life savings. This caused the Great Depression. I had my own policies to combat this Great Depression, but since it was completely new, no one knew what to do with it. Generally, my policies were considered too little, too late. My successor, Franklin Delano Roosevelt, had much more aggressive policies concerning the Great Depression. Together, these were collectively known as the New Deal. Ultimately, they were much more successful than my policies, and he is known as the one who fixed the Great Depression.
We suggest that you buy one, if not multiple, review books. A common and popular book was Patches to a Five, which has each chapter summarizes the key points and provides terms and practice questions. A big component of Patches to a Five is practice exams. There's multiple ones, and they're really useful in studying for the AP exam. We suggest that you start the review book right away in the fall, and follow along with Mr. Nygaard as he's teaching the subjects that are covered. Suggest that you do that with all the review books that you purchase. Companion to 5 Steps to a 5 is the flashcard, which are very useful for quickly quizzing yourself on key terms and people. Other brands of review books include Princeton Review, and then also Barron's. My favorite review book was Berkner's 101, U.S. History, which quickly summarized key points and listed people individually describing them. This allowed for quick reference when you didn't know an individual key term or person. As we mentioned before, follow along with Mr. Nygaard in class as he's discussing these topics. The night before the AP exam, go through the glossary in the back